The 41st call came at 11:06 the next morning. Daniel's name flashed across my phone while I stood in my mother's kitchen, counting out her new heart medication beside a chipped ceramic mug that said "World's Best Mom." On the table, my phone kept vibrating against the wood like something trapped beneath it. 41 calls, 3 voicemails, 7 messages. The last one read, "Call me now." The bank froze everything. I stared at the screen, then through the window at Daniel's black SUV sitting in our driveway 3 streets away. The same SUV he had refused to let me borrow 28 hours earlier. The same morning he had looked me in the eye and said, "That's your problem. Handle it." So he just had no idea what handling it was going to cost him. Let me go back. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 52 years old, had been married for 23 years, and had spent most of that marriage mistaking endurance for loyalty. My mother, Eleanor Hayes, was 81. She had been a school secretary for 37 years, the kind of woman who remembered every child's birthday, every teacher's coffee order, and every parent who came into the office pretending not to be scared. She was not dramatic. She did not exaggerate. She did not call unless there was a reason. So when my phone rang at 7:18 on a gray Thursday morning and I saw Mom on the screen, I answered before the second ring. "Morning, sweetheart." Her voice was wrong. Too light, too careful. "Mom, I'm sorry to call so early." That was her habit, apologizing before asking for anything. "What's wrong?" There was a pause, and in it I heard the faint clink of a spoon against china. My chest feels strange. Tight, I suppose. And my left hand keeps tingling. Every muscle in my body went cold. "How long?" "Since about 6. "Mom, I thought it might pass." "Did you call Dr. Patel?" "Yes. His nurse said I should come in immediately. She said not to drive myself." "I'm coming." "Claire, you have work." I said, "I'm coming. Put on your coat, get your medication list, and sit by the front door." I ended the call and grabbed my purse from the kitchen counter. Outside, January pressed its pale face against the windows. The driveway was slick with last night's freezing rain. My blue Honda sat beneath a thin silver crust of ice. I turned the key. Click. Nothing. I tried again. Click, click. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, then died. No, no, no. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel for half a second, forcing myself to think. Daniel's SUV. A black Ford Expedition less than 2 years old, full tank heated seats, sitting 10 feet away. I hurried back inside. Daniel was at the kitchen island wearing a quarter-zip sweater and expensive golf shoes, scrolling through his phone while his coffee steamed beside him. His clubs leaned by the back door. "Daniel, my car won't start." He did not look up. "Battery?" "I don't know. Mom is having chest pain. Her doctor wants her there immediately. I need your SUV." That got his attention, though, not in the way I expected. He looked toward the window, then at his watch. "I need it today." "Daniel, her left hand is tingling." "Then call an ambulance." She panics in ambulances. "You know what happened when Dad died?" My father had suffered a stroke 11 years earlier. He died before the ambulance reached the hospital. My mother had never been able to hear a siren without gripping the nearest solid object. Daniel exhaled through his nose. "Claire, I have a meeting." "You have golf." "It's with Morrison. We're discussing the expansion." "Then take a ride share." He stared at me as though I had suggested he walk barefoot through snow. With my clubs, I could hear the refrigerator humming behind us. A clock ticked over the pantry door. Somewhere upstairs, a heating vent rattled. "Daniel," I said slower this time, "my 81-year-old mother may be having a heart problem." "I heard you." "Then give me the keys." He picked up his coffee and took a sip. That small movement told me everything before he spoke. "Claire, she's your mother." I stood completely still. His expression did not change. "That's your problem," he said. "Handle it." There are moments in a marriage when the room does not change, but everything inside it does. The same granite counters, the same framed wedding photograph near the hallway, the same man I had slept beside for 23 years. And yet nothing looked familiar. He had heard the words chest pain. He had heard left hand tingling. He had heard 81 years old. He simply did not believe any of it should inconvenience him. I did not yell. I did not beg again. I picked up my phone. "Fine." Something in my voice made him glance at me, but only briefly. Then he reached for his golf gloves. I called Carol Mitchell. Carol lived 3 houses down from my mother. She was 68, a retired emergency room nurse with cropped silver hair and the kind of calm that made panic feel embarrassed for showing up. She answered immediately. "Claire, Mom's having chest pressure and tingling in her left hand. My car won't start. Can you take us to Dr. Patel?" Her tone changed in half a second. "We're not going to Dr. Patel. We're going to St. Catherine's. Bring her medication list. I'll be at her house in 3 minutes. No questions, no complaints, no golf clubs. 3 minutes." By the time I reached Mom's porch on foot, Carol's red Subaru was already idling at the curb. Mom sat just inside the front door wearing her blue wool coat and pearl earrings, as if dressing properly might make the situation less serious. "I'm sorry," she said when she saw me. I knelt in front of her and took both her hands. "They're cold. It's January." "Mom!" She gave me a small, guilty smile. Carol came in carrying a blood pressure cuff. "Eleanor, I'm going to check you once and then we are leaving." Mom glanced toward the street. "Where's Daniel?" The question struck harder than it should have. He had something he couldn't move. Even then I protected him. Carol looked at me. She knew I was lying. She did not expose me. 10 minutes later, we were driving through the automatic doors of the St. Catherine's emergency entrance. A nurse brought a wheelchair before I had even finished giving Mom's name. As they pushed her away, she reached back and caught my fingers. "Don't worry, sweetheart." She was the one being taken behind those doors, and she was comforting me. I stood under the harsh white lights, breathing antiseptic and burnt coffee, and checked my phone. Nothing from Daniel. Not a call. Not a message. Not even 3 words asking whether she was alive. My husband had told me to handle it. So I did. I just had not yet understood how much of my life I was about to handle without him. I woke before the alarm the next morning and lay still in the dark, listening to Daniel breathe beside me. He slept on his back, one arm above his head, completely at ease. For 23 years, I had envied that about him. Daniel could put down a problem simply because he no longer wanted to hold it. Work stress, family conflict, a sick relative, a difficult conversation. He set it down and walked away. I picked it up. I carried it quietly so no one else would trip. At 6:35, I slipped out of bed dressed and went downstairs. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the garlic Daniel had cooked the night before. One plate sat in the sink, his plate. He came down 20 minutes later wearing a pressed blue shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. "How's Eleanor?" "Not Mom, not your mother. Eleanor. She had a mild cardiac event." He opened the refrigerator. "But she's okay. She's stable." "Good." He took out orange juice and poured a glass as though we were discussing a delayed flight. I watched him drink. "Do you understand that the doctor said we were right not to wait?" Daniel set the glass down. "I never told you to wait. You refused to let me use the SUV. I told you to call an ambulance. You knew why she was afraid of one." He rubbed his forehead. "Claire, I had an important day yesterday. She could have died. But she didn't." The words landed softly. That made them worse. Daniel seemed to realize it a second too late. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." He sighed and leaned back against the counter. "This is getting dramatic." There it was. The old method. Minimize the event. Question my reaction. Make me defend the fact that I had been hurt. "I'm going to the hospital," I said. "I have a lender call at 9. I didn't ask. His expression tightened. For years I had avoided that look. The faint narrowing of his eyes. The suggestion that I had stepped outside the role he preferred me to occupy. I picked up my coat and left. Mom was sitting upright when I reached her room. Her color had returned and her reading glasses rested low on her nose. A crossword puzzle lay open across her lap. She looked up. 5 letters means emotionally distant. I stared at her. Cold. She counted the boxes. Perfect. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Mom filled in the word carefully, then nodded toward the chair. "Sit." I placed her address book and charger on the bedside table. "You look better." "I feel better." The oatmeal attempted to kill me, but my heart survived. "That hospital food is aggressive. Your father would have salted it." Dad salted fruit. He believed seasoning was a constitutional right. We smiled. For a few minutes it was easy. Then Mom closed the puzzle. "I want to talk about my estate." I felt my shoulders tense. "Mom, you just had a cardiac event," which has made me more interested in practical matters, not less. You don't need to change anything because you're upset. Her eyes sharpened. I'm not upset. She folded her hands over the blanket. I am accurate. The room went quiet. She told me she had reviewed her trust documents during the night. After my father died, Mom had placed the house investments and several accounts into a revocable living trust. I was the primary beneficiary. Daniel and I had been named successor co-trustees. At the time, it had seemed reasonable. Daniel owned a remodeling company. He understood contracts, property financing. Mom believed that if something happened to her, he would help me manage everything. She had also signed a letter 3 years earlier stating that she intended to contribute up to $150,000 toward Daniel's company expansion if she sold the house or after her death. I had known about the letter. What I had not known was that Daniel had already shown it to a bank. He said it would only demonstrate future family backing, Mom told me. When? Last fall. And you agreed. I agreed because I trusted his intentions. She looked toward the window. I no longer do. I moved closer to the bed. Mom, this should not be about punishing him. It isn't. Her voice remained calm. Your father and I worked for everything we had. We paid off that house in 2008. We saved when our friends bought boats. We repaired things instead of replacing them. We did not build security so a man could count it before it belonged to him. I swallowed. You included Daniel because you trusted him to take care of me. Yes. She looked directly at me. And yesterday, when taking care of you required one small inconvenience, he showed me what that trust was worth. At 9:18, she called Michael Grant. He arrived at 11:40 wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a worn leather briefcase. He had handled my father's estate and knew my mother well enough not to speak to her like a fragile old woman. First, he asked the nurse whether Mom had received any medication that could affect her judgment. Then he spoke with Mom alone for 15 minutes. When he invited me back in, his legal pad was already covered in neat blue handwriting. Your mother is clear about what she wants, he said. The changes were specific. Daniel would be removed as successor co-trustee. I would serve alone with a professional fiduciary as backup. The house currently valued at approximately $685,000, and investment accounts totaling roughly $430,000 would remain in a protected trust for me and later my children. Daniel would have no authority to manage, borrow against, or pledge those assets. The letter promising up to $150,000 for his business would be formally revoked. $25,000 would go to the cardiac unit at St. Catherine's. Education funds for my children would remain unchanged. I listened from the corner of the room, my hands cold in my lap. When Michael paused, I looked at Mom. You do not have to do this for me. She did not hesitate. I am not doing it to reward you. She reached for her water and took a small sip. I'm doing it because your father and I earned the right to decide where our work goes. Michael nodded once and returned to his notes. Mom turned back to me. And there is something else you need to understand. Her voice softened, but not her meaning. You keep calling yourself strong because you can carry everything alone. I looked down. But sometimes a woman carries everything alone because the man beside her keeps putting his share down. My eyes burned. For years, people had praised me for being capable, reliable, low maintenance. No one had asked what it cost to become that way. Michael completed the amendment shortly after 1. He explained that relevant institutions would receive formal notice, including the bank reviewing Daniel's expansion financing. That was when my phone rang. Daniel. His name lit the screen. Once. Twice. I turned it face down. He thought he was calling the woman who had always cleaned up his mistakes. He did not know she had finally stopped reaching for the broom. By the time Mom was discharged the next morning, Daniel had called 16 times. The first call came at 7:11. The second at 7:13, then 3 more before the nurse finished reviewing Mom's medication schedule. I kept my phone on silent in the pocket of my coat, not to punish him, not to create suspense. I simply had more important things to do. Mom sat on the edge of the hospital bed wearing her blue wool coat, pearl earrings, and the expression of a woman deeply offended by the wheelchair waiting outside her room. I can walk, she said. The discharge nurse smiled without looking up from the paperwork. I believe you. Then why is that thing here? Hospital policy. Hospital policy was written by people who enjoy making healthy people feel sick. You had a cardiac event 2 days ago, a mild one. The nurse finally looked at her. Mrs. Hayes, if you make me argue before 8 in the morning, I'm adding another lap around the nurse's station. Mom narrowed her eyes. Then she sat in the wheelchair. Fine, but I'm standing the second we reach the doors. She did. Carol was waiting outside in her red Subaru, the engine running, heat turned high. She stepped out before I could reach the passenger side and took Mom's overnight bag. "Welcome back to civilian life," she said. Mom straightened her coat. "I was never enlisted. After 2 nights of hospital oatmeal, you qualify for combat benefits." Mom laughed. That sound mattered more to me than anything Daniel could have said. My phone vibrated again. Call 17. I glanced at the screen. Daniel. Then a text appeared. "Call me. The bank contacted me." I locked the screen. Carol noticed but said nothing. We drove Mom home through streets washed pale by the winter sun. Dirty snow sat in ridges along the curbs. Bare branches scraped lightly against the sky. Everything outside looked stripped down to its structure. That was how my life felt too. Without excuses. Without decoration. Just the frame of it. At Mom's house, Carol carried the bag while I helped Mom over the icy section of the walkway. Mom accepted my arm but refused to lean too heavily on it. Independence was not a preference for her. It was a form of dignity. Inside the house smelled faintly of lavender furniture polish and the cinnamon candles she burned every Sunday. Her crossword book sat exactly where she had left it on the coffee table. For a moment, she looked around the living room as if seeing it from far away. "Good to be home?" I asked. She nodded. "Very." I made chamomile tea and lined up her medications on the kitchen table. 1 tablet with breakfast, 1 in the evening, a small bottle to keep in her purse, a follow-up appointment with the cardiologist in 10 days. While I read each label aloud, my phone continued to vibrate. 23 calls, then 26, then 29. The messages became less controlled. What exactly did she change? "Call me now. This affects both of us." The lender froze the expansion package. I turned the phone face down. Mom watched me over the rim of her mug. "You can answer it." "I know." "Are you choosing not to?" "Yes." A faint smile touched one corner of her mouth. "That is different." "What is?" "You usually answer before anyone has the chance to become uncomfortable." The truth of that settled heavily between us. I sat across from her. Did Michael know the bank would move that quickly? He said Daniel had used my letter as part of his supporting documentation. I didn't know he had gone that far. I did not know either. Mom wrapped both hands around her tea. That is what worries me most. Not that he hoped for help, that he had already built plans around money he did not own. I looked toward the back window. A squirrel moved along the fence, quick and certain. What am I supposed to do now? Mom's eyes softened. About Daniel. About everything. She took her time before answering. "Do not make a decision because of the trust." "I'm not." "Do not leave him because I changed paperwork." "I won't." "And do not stay because 23 years sounds too large to admit we're lonely." That one went straight through me. I pressed my fingers against the edge of the table. She continued gently. "You have been showing up alone for a very long time, Claire." I said nothing. "At your father's appointments." A pause. "At your children's school events." Another. "At Christmas when Daniel said work was too busy." Her voice never sharpened. It did not need to. The SUV was not the first time he left you standing alone. It was simply the first time you stopped pretending someone was beside you. My throat tightened. Outside, a delivery truck passed slowly along the street. The refrigerator hummed. The clock over the stove clicked forward 1 minute. I looked at my phone. 34 missed calls. "I need to go home," I said. Mom reached across the table and covered my hand. "You do not need to explain yourself perfectly." "I know." "No, sweetheart. You know how to explain other people. I am telling you that you do not have to." I squeezed her hand, then stood. Carol offered to drive me, but my car had been repaired that morning, and the mechanic had dropped it at Mom's house after hearing what happened. Another person who showed up without needing to be asked twice. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the call count had reached 41. Daniel's SUV sat where it always did, polished and enormous, occupying more space than it needed. I went inside. He was in the living room, pacing beside the coffee table. Loan documents, estimates, and equipment invoices were spread across the surface. His tie was loose. His face looked gray. He stopped the second he saw me. "I have been calling you all morning." "I know." "Do you know what your mother did?" "Yes." His mouth opened, then closed. "You knew. I was in the room." The shock on his face was almost pure. "And you let her." I set my purse on the chair. "She is 81 years old, mentally competent, and in control of her own property. She did not need my permission." He dragged a hand through his hair. "The bank suspended the entire expansion package." I said nothing. "They removed the family contribution from the underwriting file. Without that, the ratios don't work." "What family contribution?" He looked away. "That told me everything." "The $150,000, he said. "Money my mother never gave you. She intended to. She intended to consider it. I already signed the workshop lease." I stared at him. "You did what?" "It was time sensitive. Before the financing was final, I had to move quickly." He pointed at the documents. I put down $48,000. Non-refundable. I ordered 2 new fabrication systems. The bank was supposed to close next week. The crisis had not been caused by my mother. It had been caused by Daniel spending certainty he did not possess. He stepped closer. "You need to talk to her." Number. "Claire, this is our future. My mother was in a hospital bed yesterday. She's stable." The room went still. There it was again. The same moral arithmetic. If no one died, then he had done nothing wrong. I looked at him for a long moment. "When I told you her chest hurt and her left arm was tingling, you chose golf. It was a client meeting. You took your clubs." He looked away. "Carol came in 3 minutes," I continued. "She stayed at the hospital. She brought coffee. She listened. She helped." "Why are we talking about Carol?" "Because she showed me what concern looks like." Daniel's face hardened. "You're exaggerating one bad decision." Number. My voice remained calm. "I spent 23 years minimizing thousands of decisions. This was simply the one I could no longer rename." He stared at me as if he had never heard me speak clearly before. Then he tapped the papers with 2 fingers. "You have to fix this. We are married." I looked down at the lease, the invoices, and the loan projections built partly on my mother's labor. Then I remembered his voice in the kitchen. Cold, impatient, certain that I would solve everything. "That's your problem," I said quietly. His face changed. I held his gaze. "Handle it." Daniel stared at me as if I had struck him. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the furnace and the soft ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Outside, a car rolled past on wet pavement tires, whispering against the street. Then Daniel gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're serious?" "Yes." "You're really gonna throw that back at me?" "I'm repeating what you told me." "That was different." "Of course it was." His face tightened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means my emergency was inconvenient to you. Yours is suddenly a marriage." He opened his mouth, then shut it. The papers on the coffee table seemed to spread farther across the room now. Loan projections, equipment orders, lease documents, numbers arranged in neat columns as though neatness could make them responsible. Daniel picked up one of the pages and shook it slightly. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand exactly what's at stake." "No, you don't. I have employees, contracts, a reputation." And my mother had chest pain. "She's fine." I looked at him. He rubbed both hands over his face. "You know what I mean?" "Yes," I said. "That is the problem." He dropped the page. For the first time since I had walked in, something in his expression shifted. Not guilt. Not yet. Fear. Real fear. The kind that appears when a person realizes the usual exits are gone. "Claire, I made one bad decision." I said nothing. "One," he repeated. "And now your mother is destroying my business over it." "My mother did not sign that lease?" He looked away. "She did not order equipment before the loan closed. She did not promise her own money to your lender. She gave me the letter. She gave you a statement of intent. You treated it like a guarantee. I thought we were family." The sentence came out sharp and wounded. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. "Family. Yes, you told me she was my mother, not yours." His eyes dropped. That was said in frustration. It was said with clarity. He began pacing again. "You turned her against me." Number. "She never would have changed the trust without you. You still don't understand her." "Then explain it." I folded my arms. "She watched me make excuses for you for years." "That's ridiculous." She watched you miss birthdays, hospital visits, holidays, and my father's final appointments. She watched me cover for you every time. I was working. Sometimes. He stopped. That word landed. Sometimes I repeated you were tired. Sometimes you were busy. Sometimes you simply did not want to show up. He pointed toward me. And you never said anything. I did. When, quietly, carefully, in ways designed not to upset you. That is not the same as saying it. No, I said. It was me trying to keep a marriage peaceful by making myself smaller inside it. The anger went out of his face for a moment. He looked older. Not softer. Just older. He sank onto the edge of the couch. So what now? The question was quieter than anything he had said all afternoon. I looked around the room. Our room. The couch we had chosen after 3 weekends of disagreement. The framed photograph from our 20th anniversary. The brass lamp my father had repaired before he died. For years I had believed a shared house proved a shared life. Standing there, I understood those were not the same thing. I'm going to stay with Mom for a while. Daniel looked up sharply. You're leaving. I'm stepping away. Over a car. Number. Then what? I took a breath. I'm not leaving because you refused me a car. I'm leaving because your refusal showed me exactly what 23 years of marriage had become. He stood again. That's unfair. It may feel unfair because I stopped absorbing the cost. His jaw tightened. Claire, I'm sorry. I waited. I'm sorry this got out of control. There it was. Not I'm sorry I abandoned you. Not I'm sorry I treated your mother's emergency like an inconvenience. He was sorry the consequence had grown larger than his comfort. I never wanted any of this, he continued. I didn't know she was that sick. I told you. I thought you were panicking. I was calm. You sounded emotional. My mother's chest hurt. He exhaled hard. Fine, I handled it badly. You handled it honestly. He looked at me then. Really looked. And I saw the exact moment he understood that I was not waiting for him to persuade me. The old version of our arguments depended on my exhaustion. He would minimize. I would explain. He would become frustrated. I would apologize for my tone. By the end, nothing changed except my confidence in my own memory. That afternoon, I refused to enter the maze. I went upstairs and packed one suitcase. Clothes, medication, my laptop, personal papers. A framed photograph of me standing between my parents at my college graduation, my father's hand on one shoulder and my mother's on the other. Daniel followed me from room to room. So that's it. Number? What does that mean? It means I am not making a permanent decision in an argument. Then stay. I am making a clear decision in a quiet room. He stood in the bedroom doorway while I closed the suitcase. What am I supposed to tell people? The question was so completely Daniel that I almost felt tenderness for him. Almost. Tell them the truth. What truth? That your wife asked for help and you decided she would manage without you. I carried the suitcase downstairs. At the front door, he said my name once. Not angrily, not loudly. Claire. I turned. For 1 second, I saw the man I had married at 29. Ambitious, charming, certain he could build a life larger than either of us had imagined. Maybe that man had loved me. Maybe he still did in the limited way he understood love. But love that appears only when consequences arrive is not partnership. I do love you, he said. I nodded. I believe you. His face changed slightly. But I no longer believe love is enough when one person is doing all the showing up. I left. Over the next 6 weeks, Daniel kept his company but lost the expansion. He negotiated out of part of the workshop lease and sold one of the fabrication systems at a loss. He did not become homeless. He did not lose everything. He simply had to carry the weight of choices he had made himself. Mom began cardiac rehabilitation twice a week. Carol joined us for Sunday coffee and brought lemon cake that was always slightly overbaked and always completely eaten. I stayed in Mom's guest room for 3 weeks, then rented a small townhouse 10 minutes away. I met with a divorce attorney, not because of the trust, not because of money, because the quiet in my new home felt unfamiliar at first, then peaceful. There was no tension waiting behind the next room, no need to predict someone else's mood, no pressure to explain why my needs mattered. Mom never celebrated Daniel's trouble. One afternoon while we sat at her kitchen table, she said, "Consequences are not cruelty." I understood then that revenge was never the point. The point was accuracy. The point was seeing my life clearly and refusing to rename loneliness as strength. My mother needed one ride to the hospital. Daniel believed refusing that ride would cost him nothing because I had always found another way. He was right about one thing. I did find another way. I found a neighbor who showed up. I found a mother who saw the truth. And somewhere between the emergency room and the 41st phone call, I found the woman I had abandoned while trying to keep everyone else comfortable. I did not get revenge on my husband. I simply stopped protecting him from the life he had built. And for the first time in 23 years, I was no longer handling everything alone. If this story reminded you of a moment when someone's actions finally showed you the truth, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe love should be measured not only by words, but by who shows up when it matters, subscribe and join us for more stories about boundaries, dignity, and the quiet courage it takes to begin again.